All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the latest iteration of our meetup. It's a pleasure to have you all here and those who are joining remotely. I'm Dean Shaw, the country leader of DoiT International for Australia and New Zealand. If you don't know us, we are GCP, Google Cloud Platform's largest managed service provider in the world, as well as a key partner of AWS. And tonight we have one of our engineering rock stars, Derek Chin, presenting a talk on Apache Airflow. So without delay, I'll hand it over to Derek. You want to sit?
Yeah, I think I'm using this one. Yep.
You're right? Yep.
Cool. Yep. Do you want to?
Dean, did you want to say something about DoiT International?
Okay, I'll just continue. So just continue to what Dean's talking. So we are a largest partner with GCP. We are also doing a lot of support work for AWS as well. We have this many, if you call that nowadays all remote, we have these regions where we all have like engineers and solution architects to help our customer. So basically, if you are with us, we can support you 24/7. So basically, you just need to onboard your billing with us, and then we provide free support to you. Okay, to the topic. In our last meetup in March, I talked about Airflow. Basically, in that session, I did a lot of sort of pretty much like an introductional talk about Airflow and why it is so popular and how you can run that on AWS and GCP. Today, I'm focused more on the Airflow itself. Basically, I will start with a simple business requirements, and I'm going to walk you through how I can design the pipeline, how I write the task and custom operators inside, and how you can pretty much testing Airflow, and also make it more like a production ready, having CI/CD and all sort of monitoring and troubleshooting ready. A bit about me, so I'm Derek. So I'm one of the cloud data architect within DoiT. I'm focused more on data engineering side on GCP and AWS. And here's today's agenda. So basically, like what I mentioned before, I want to start with pretty much like an overview about Airflow, just a really quick one compared to the session before. And then I'm going to walk through an example and just design the pipeline and how to implement and test and deploy that. In the meantime, I have created a Slido link in here. So if you can scan your phone from this QR code, you can add your question while I'm doing the talk. And I'm going to answer the question after my talk. Just leave it for 20 seconds for scan, maybe. Yeah, so hopefully after this session, you can pretty much just can get the requirements and design your own deck and find a way you can implement your Airflow tasks, and you know how to test that and do your CI/CD and troubleshooting. Quick overview about Airflow. So Airflow is a Apache open source project. It's powered by Python, so meaning you can use Python to define your workflow code compared to other tools where you use XML or YAML. So by using a programming language, you can do a lot of things that if you use YAML or XML, you cannot do that, or at least not easy to do. And also by using Python, you have a lot of kind of open source library that you can use, or the library that you used before can be used in Airflow. And also, Airflow itself is better included, meaning Airflow itself contains a lot of integration with other systems, and they already created this open source project and has a lot of library built in, meaning you can create a pipeline without writing your own plugin, but it's good to know that you can write plugin because that will make your life easier if you sort of making a real life pipeline. And next one is the screenshot about Airflow. So Airflow has a really feature-rich UI. It can display all the pipeline in there, And also you can do some interactions within the UI. For example, if one of the tasks fail for some reason, like let's say a temporary network issue, you can go there and just click the task and retry, and then the task will continue. And also it will show you your runs, which I'm going to show you later. And lastly, Airflow has a really, really big community. You can see they have like 21,000 stars on GitHub and counting. So, and people in there are really friendly. Like personally, I submit 2 PRs to fix their issues, and they're really happy to accept that. And I really encourage people to actually contribute to Airflow because we can all make this better. So a little bit of concept just before I go to the real sort of requirements. So if you imagine that you have a workflow, it's pretty much like a lot of tasks within your workflow. So in Airflow, there's a concept called a DAG. DAG is a group of tasks where it used to finish your workflow. So the difference between a DAG and a traditional, let's say you have a bunch of bash script or Jenkins file, is that within the DAG, you can have a task running in parallel. And also, the tasks are implemented by either a sensor or an operator. So the difference between sensor and operator is operator only run once, but sensor can do a lot of polling, where you can just say, I'm going to, let's say a file system, I'm going to poll in the file arrival every, let's say, 30 seconds or something. And operator and sensor, they're using a thing called hook to interacting with external systems such as an API. So that's a pretty quick overview about Airflow. By the way, if you are interested in more about like a concept about Airflow, you can go to the YouTube link in this meetup. You can find my previous talk in there. And cool, finally, we're coming to a business requirements. So on the right-hand side, you can see there's a screenshot. It is an email that I got recently from one of the really famous e-commerce website. The other day, I was sort of looking for toys for my daughter, and I was looking for a bouncy pony. And after, I don't know, I was maybe doing something else, and after 3 hours, I got this email. Then I started to think about like, hey, how this thing got generated? Basically, there are multiple ways to do that, but in this kind of session, what I'm gonna sort of imagine is a requirements that you are running an e-commerce website where you have people looking in your website, you have some kind of tracking in there, and then you have a scheduled job. Let's assume you're gonna run daily, not like them, they're running like multiple times in a day, which is a bit annoying sometimes. And I'm gonna assume everything is on GCP because that's what I'm been working on in the past 2 years. So data source. So for this kind of website, I have data source such as account data. I have items or / products, so like products data. And I have some kind of tracking, website tracking activities. And I have people's safe search and purchase history and other stuff. So for now, to make this session, slightly easier compared to the real life pipeline, I'm going to focus on 3 data sources, which are accounts, items, and website activities. So let's use these 3 stuff to generate a nudge email. So basically, when we sort of design in the pipeline, there are a few sort of principles that we are following. So like I showed before, if we could have a task running in parallel, that would save some time. If you are running, a really heavy load, if you have tasks running sequentially compared to in parallel, so the latter one tend to save some time. And also, one of the key things that we normally do is that if you are running daily or hourly, you tend to check your previous run before the current run running, because you don't want to get, spam your customer twice. Sometimes if you do that once, they're okay. If you do that twice, they will be pretty pissed and sort of unsubscribe your campaign email. And the third one is Airflow is really, a feature-rich, battery-included. So my experience is that if I design a pipeline, I tend to use more building stuff because it is really tested by the community. But if I cannot find the built-in stuff, I will build my own. And the next principle is that when we design pipeline, they are like maybe within the pipeline you have kind of different conditions. So normally in Airflow you use branching so that you get a condition, you decide which way to go. That's also can be included in the DAG. And you can have retries for each task. So the default retry, I think for GCP is about 5, but I normally set to 3 because if I can't retry in 3 times, I'm pretty sure that task is not that healthy. And the last one is we need to somehow balance the readability and abstraction. I mentioned in the last talk, because the DAG is defined by Python, some people tend to generate a really sort of kind of function to generate part of the DAG, and then normally people who write the DAG is not a guy or girl who maintain the DAG. So readability is quite important in my view. So back to the requirements. So if I do that in a traditional way, not in Airflow, basically what I'm doing now is like, if I want to generate a nudge, what I do is I write some bash script. Let's say, assume I'm running a bash script, which will be running in cron job. And then what I do is I load account, load items, load activities, and after that I generate a nudge. That's pretty much like a sequential workflow, like a cron tab way or bash way. You can do that in like this. So in Airflow, just before I show you the Airflow DAG, I'm gonna maybe talk a bit about my Airflow setup for this talk. So basically what I have is I'm using Docker Compose to spin up an Airflow cluster. So cluster means like Airflow has scheduler, Airflow has worker, has a website, and also Airflow has a backend database. In here, I use Postgres as my database, and I'm using Redis and Celery as well because it's it's a slightly like a distributed system running in my local. It's kind of funny in any way. And to write a DAG, so this is the DAG that I'm coming up with. I'm going to show you why I designed it like this. So firstly, like what I mentioned before, so it's always a good idea if you have your workflow running, you check what is the latest run before you actually do the job. So in here, my first task is just to get the latest run. And after that, I'm going to check if the workflow should go ahead. If the latest run is today's run, meaning the run has happened before, then the task will be going straight to the finish. But if not, I'm going to kick off the task. And then before I load the data in this instance, I'm using BigQuery from loading data from GCS to BigQuery. I want to make sure the data set actually exists because a lot of things happening where you are running your data pipeline. There could be somebody in the DevOps or SRE team. They're running some kind of infrastructure change. They do their Terraform apply. For some reason, they miss your section. Then there could be a chance that they somehow remove your data set. And then if you don't handle that, it will fail your task. So basically, I want to do that check before I actually load the job. And then after that, I have 3 tasks running in parallel, which is loading the data. So in this instance, I make it slightly easier than the real-life one. In the real-life one, maybe the tracking activity coming from Google Analytics or from Adobe, where they provide you some kind of, let's say, SFTP or some other way for you to get your data. So in this instance, I'm just put everything in GCS and then load from there. And after that, my task next for that is I'm going to run a magic SQL statement, which will be generating the nudge. So in real life, there could be more things happening. For example, I want to load people's email preference. Other than I just send them anyway. So in real life, you actually need to read another data set where filtering out people who just don't want to receive this kind of campaign email. But a lot of companies actually don't respect that, by the way. So yeah. So after that, the task is finished. So that's the the DAG I sort of designed. And enough talk, let me show you the code. So before that, so here is the Docker compose file that I used to create my Airflow cluster. So this one is the file that I actually got from Airflow documentation. So in there, they have this kind of Docker file where you can see the Postgres in here and the Redis and web server, scheduler, worker, and Celery and Flower as well. So it's all here. So once it's running, it becomes like this. So this is Airflow 2.0. So the version that you are using on GCP or AWS is 1.10.x. So this one is the newly designed. It actually got released, I think, pretty like late last year. And they did a lot of kind of UI improvement, and also one of the biggest improvement I found was the scheduler. Previously, it was quite slow. When you kick off a DAG, it will wait for a long time, but now it's quicker. So if I zoom in, so the DAG screenshot is what I got from here. So I have this kind of DAG in here. So to the code, the DAG looks like this. So in here, you can see in the very beginning, I sort of import a DAG instance in here. And then after that, I import a lot of operator. Like what I said, if you can use built-in operator, use built-in operator, because that will save a lot of time for testing and maintenance. And these two, because I can't find these two operator, therefore I created myself. It's kind of interesting that I was thinking that Airflow, GitHub, you know, the repo, they have like a check BigQuery operator, but they don't. So I just created myself. And then after that, you can see I define a lot of constants in here, and the branching function as well, which I'm going to talk about later. So in here, you can see I have a DAG. Basically, I'm running this DAG 3 a.m. in the morning. Yeah, and also name it like a generate nudges DAG. And then after that, I'm using the with keyword in here. So inside of this, it will save me a lot of time to sort of telling this operator I'm using the DAG. So this is another way of defining the DAG compared to not using the with keyword in here. So in here, I define I'm using GCS list operator to get a last run. I thought about building an API and hook a backend like all the other companies are doing when they are tracking their things. They create an API, a really dumb API, get and put, and then they put that database in there. Basically, what it does is just record something. So this is my way of doing that. I just create a bucket, and then every time I finish a run, I just put a file in there. The file name is the date. So if you are running something really lightweight, try this. So if you look at this operator, so basically what it does is it will check if the current date file exists. If yes, it will have the object URI into Airflow XCOM. So XCOM is one thing that Airflow is using to pass a value from one task to another. So in this instance, what I'm doing now is just I'm gonna check if the file exists, and then it will go to this branching operator, which we're using this function to determine which task to run next. So in this scenario, you can see I'm pulling the value from this task, the previous task, and get a return value. And then I'm just doing a if else in here, just say if today's run exists, so I'm going to finish the run. If not, I'm going to kick off the run. So this is just a really simple way to do branching. So in another use case where if you want to design a pipeline where for some data source you need transformation, for some data source you don't, you can actually do the same thing where you read the information and then you do the branching in here. And after that, I'm putting a dummy operator in here just to have some kind of visible stuff. And then after that, I'm checking the BigQuery dataset exists. Like what I mentioned before, this thing actually doesn't exist within Airflow itself, so I created my own. So this will come to a way, how to say this? This will come to a session where it's quite important, because when you write the DAG, you need to decide if you should use the built-in one or not. So if I go back to my slides, so the next page is pretty much a few links that I'm not sure is that. So a few links that I used for like my experience to finding the built-in operator. There are a few ways. So the first way is the actual Airflow website itself. You can see after 2.0, their website, their documentation got improved a lot. So in here, I'm just saying I want to find a provider, which is Google. If I can go here, Google is in here. And then after that, I want to find the operator. And then I want to go to the Google Cloud operator. And then I'm going to find maybe, let's say, BigQuery. So this is the one way you can find if they have a built-in operator in here. In here, they also find some of the sample DAG in here, so that you can sort of have a look and copy some of the code and have a try yourself. And there's another way to do that, which is a new thing. This thing actually got released, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, I can't remember. So there's a company called Astronomer. So they are really active in the Airflow community. So they created a thing like this. So the beauty for this thing is that it has search. So I can just do, let's say I do GCS list. So you see in here, I can just find an operator in here. So this is pretty handy. So if you want to find some kind of building, you can use this as well. And finally, which is the thing that I do sometimes, is go to the source, like source code. Source code is good. So in here, I have this Airflow GitHub. So normally what I do is I clone that to my local. And then I can just do search, do GCS listing here. And you see in here, I can find the example DAG. And I can find the actual implementation for the DAG. So this is pretty good because you got a source code, so you can have a look. And lastly, because recently one of my friends, their company is gonna use Airflow, and their use case is to load data from S3 to MongoDB. And I tried these 3 ways and couldn't find anything. Then the last shot is really interesting. So I actually find the other way of doing that is actually Google. A simple Google, I do S3 to MongoDB Airflow. And then I found this GitHub repo where somebody actually implemented that. So the good thing for that is that will save my time to write an operator like this. So after that, if you are sort of unlucky, you couldn't find the stuff in here, then you have to write your own one. So next thing I want to show you is how to write a custom operator. So inside of here, so like what I mentioned before, I couldn't find a check BigQuery dataset operator. And then I decided to write my own. So to write a operator is quite easy because Airflow defines that base operator in there where they sort of hide a lot of complexity for you, where all you need to do is just to inherit it from this class and then start to implement your own one. So in here, I just put a few variables in here, a dataset ID, which is the dataset I want to look into, and GCP connection ID, which is the connection I'm going to use to connect to GCP. And then after that, all I need to do is to implement the execute function. So inside of execute function, what I need to do is to talk to BigQuery. So I'm using a BigQuery hook, which is another built-in helper function, so a helper class within Airflow. I'm initialize a hook in here, and then they have a function to list all the dataset within the project. And then all I'm doing now is just to to check if my data set is actually within this list. If yes, I return true. If not, I raise an exception. So this is really, how to say, this is a really easy way to implement a custom data operator. And again, if you have the code in here, you can see it's quite similar because the way you should do operator is just, it's nothing different from the official Airflow. Just try to sort of learn what they are doing. You see they are using similar stuff. They initialize all this kind of thing. They have a hook in there. They do a function. So basically, just do whatever the community is doing. Yeah, so that's one operator. And so back to the DAG, I have this operator, I have this checking BigQuery finished, and then what I do next is I load all this CSV file to BigQuery. So in here, I'm using the building operator. It's called GCS to BigQuery operator. In here, I just specify the source object within the bucket, and then I specify the schema, and then the table, it will just load it. So I repeated this for other DAGs, other CSV files. So in here, some people tend to be doing something like, I'm gonna write a for loop for whatever in this account or items, and then generate this thing. Don't do that because that's not readable. So just do that, copy the paste, and get the code in here. Just let whoever maintain your DAG can read it, can understand immediately, other than you write a for loop to dynamically generating that. Again, that's my own opinion. And then after that in here, the final thing I was thinking to do was I just want to write a query because all the data I need is actually in the bucket. I just run a SQL query to generate the output. And then again, I look into the built-in operator. There's nothing that takes a query and the table. It will write to the table. That thing doesn't exist. So again, I write my own operator in here. So it's similar pattern. I just define a few variables in here. So in here, I just say I want to have a query. I want to have a table. And then basically, I run this query, and then the result will be saved to the table. So it's actually, the hook actually has this, but there's no operator. Therefore, I have to create my own one. So again, after this, so I have the DAG defined. And the final last thing is how to put the sort of tasks in sequence. So in here, the first line, you can see I have this running. After my check run, so this thing actually go to the two things. You can see I have a listing here, meaning the downstream for the check run date is either finish run or kickoff run. And then because that's a branching operator, you can go either way. So this is how you can have things running like in parallel. In this case, because the previous one was check run date is a branching operator, so you will go to either finish run or kickoff run. But in this case is I have these three things running in parallel because the upstream task is not a branching operator, meaning it will run these three things in parallel. So this is pretty much the whole DAG defined in here. So go back to the slides. The next thing I want to show you is once you have everything done in here, like you write a DAG, you write a custom operator, you drop the file in there, you test everything works. And some people may say, hey, that's the end of the story. I have a pipeline ready. But like every normal software program, you need to actually test. So the other day, I was having a chat with one of our clients, and he asked my suggestion about, I want to hire data engineers. Do I hire a software engineer or I hire people who are really, I don't know, in the SQL space? Because that's a really good question. And my view for that is like, because data pipeline to me is nothing but a normal software program. Normal software program, you want to write tests on that. So it's just, your choice. You could, get people who are really, skilled in software engineering, or you can get people in more data, and then they can either work together and upskill each other in each way. That's just my suggestion. But in the end, it's a software program. You need to test that. And then in here, you can see a test pyramid. We normally have like unit tests, you have service tests, you have UI tests. But in this case, we don't have like data pipeline, we don't have a UI. I mean, you have Airflow UI, but your data pipeline doesn't really require a UI to be sort of like that. And then you can see like you could invest a lot of time just to make your unit test coverage good, and then you can spend less time to actually test in the DAG. So it's like, how to say, it's a balanced thing. So normally what I do is for the unit test, I want to cover different conditions. And for the end-to-end test, I want to cover some of the scenarios, because some people tend to invest a lot of time to do end-to-end, but miss the unit test. Or people do that, like I do really heavy, like 99% of unit tests, and then I do like only one end-to-end. So we need to somehow sort of balance that. But in my experience, if you can have unit tests which cover, I mean, all the conditions, and end-to-end tests cover, the normal scenario, that would be good. So again, check the code. Because when preparing this talk, I don't see too many sort of talks just talking about testing. But if you actually have a data pipeline, you actually need a really, good way of testing that. So in here, I have a testing folder. So basically, to test Airflow, one of the first things you should do is to do this, 6 lines or even 4 lines. Basically, all it does is to load all your DAGs to see if there's any import error. So it's quite interesting. So if I in here, I just miss one of the import, it will fail. Or I have a typo, let's say within this kind of operator, it will fail. So by having a test like this, it will just pick up all the things. So if there's any issue with your DAG, it will find in here. And then after that, I wrote 2 plugins. Therefore, I need to write 2 unit tests. So in here, if you are familiar with Python, we normally write ways in, like, we have a unit test, we have a PyTest. So basically, I'm following what the community is doing. I'm using unit tests to define my tests, like a class like this. And then I'm using PyTest to run my test. So in here, I'm importing my custom library. I'm importing the one of the dataset item, which is the output of the list dataset. So I define them in here. And then after that, I have 2 test cases in here so far. First one is the happy case scenario. So basically, I'm initialize my own custom operator, and then I'm just mocking the hook, because in your unit test, you don't want to call outside. So I see some of the people say, I have a unit test, but they're actually calling outside, which is kind of interesting. I don't call that unit test. So basically, you want to mock the output. For this case, I'm just say, I have a function called getList datasets list. So in here, my return value is actually defined in here, which is a dataset list item, which contains this dummy dataset, meaning this test cover if the dataset exists, it should return true. So in here, I'm doing asserting here. So the second one is if the dataset doesn't exist. So I'm putting, when I initialize this operator, I've just put a non-exist dataset ID. And then again, I'm having the same mock hook in here, return the same thing, but this thing is not in there. Then I'm using PyTest to catch the exception. Basically, I'm running this. I'm expecting the exception will raise, and you will say dataset ID doesn't exist. So this is pretty much like a 2 test case where I can cover 2 conditions, either exist or not exist. And for the other test, what I'm doing is to run a query, write the data into a table. So what I'm doing now is I'm still mocking the hook. I'm calling the operator, execute that, and then what I'm doing now is I'm just asserting. I'm actually calling this function, or calling the run query function, with the right parameter. So this is good enough for me to make sure this operator is good. But in some instance, sometimes when you actually adding more stuff within your operator, you somehow maybe need to put a try catch, because there could be some kind of, let's say, exception when you're executing this. Either the table doesn't exist or the query is not in the right syntax. So those are the stuff that could be improved in the operator in here. So that's pretty much like a unit test. So to run that, there's a trick in here. So I wrote a bash script, a really dumb one. So firstly, I just get a current directory, and then I'm deleting all these temp files because sometimes it causes problem. And then the final thing is running these PyTests, but I'm putting a Python parse in here. So to people who are not familiar with Python, Python parse is a really tricky thing. So in Airflow's instance, so Airflow treats, when you run Airflow, you tell Airflow plugin. So this plugin folder is the actual where the plugin sits. So in here, if you don't specify that, your test will fail. So this is the thing that if you're running that, just make sure you add this in here. So to run that, I'm just running a bash script in here, which will be running my 4 tests so far in here. OK. Oh, sorry, I'm doing unit tests. I'm doing end-to-end. Anyway, while this thing is running, I'm going to talk about the end-to-end test. So end-to-end test is another topic, which is kind of interesting because there are multiple ways of doing that. So if you are familiar with testing a website, it's pretty much like you launch a website. Before that, you're preparing all the data within the database. You launch a website, and then you do some interaction. You check the result. So data pipeline is the similar stuff. So basically, you prepare the input, or you cleaned up your database, whatever, and then you run your pipeline, and then you check the results. So in this case, I put a steps in here. Basically, what I'm doing now is I'm cleaning up all the histories, like raw data from the bucket, cleaning up all the data from the table, and then I'm putting the test data into the bucket, and then I'm triggering the DAG. And then after that, I'm just checking the notch table contains the right data that I expected. And then to run that, what I'm doing now is I just want to authenticate Google Cloud default. That will give me enough permission to run the job. And then I just run the bash script, which I happen to just run there. Anyway, so if I go through these tests, again, I'm using unit tests to define my test class, and then I'm using PyTest to run that. So basically, the setup function will be running in the very beginning. So basically, what I'm doing is doing all these kind of cleaning stuff. Firstly, I get a current date. I cleaned up everything. And then after that, I'm going to generate and upload a test file. In this instance, I prepared a test data in here. So what I'm doing, if you can have a look at the test function. So basically, it's nothing interesting. So basically, it's just copy the file and then put in the right date within that. You can see I have a few days already. And then upload to the bucket. And then trigger DAG is the thing I want to talk about. So in here, because I'm running Docker Compose, so my way of triggering that is I'm running Docker Compose and running a command within Airflow scheduler container. Within that, I'm running Airflow DAG trigger. So Airflow has a CLI which can use to trigger the DAG. So this is, if you're running that in Docker Compose, this is the way to do that. But if you are running, let's say inside of Google GCP Composer, or you are using AWS managed Airflow, on GCP you can use Kubernetes. You can use kubectl to run the command. Or you use on AWS, you can run that in Fargate as well. Just the same thing, running something within the container, which will be triggering the DAG. And then the last thing is check if the file actually in there. So basically, I'm just doing a really simple one, just select things in there, and then I'm just checking its expected result in that. So this is a way of testing that. I'm not saying this is the only way to do end-to-end, but this is the way that I feel like it's like a normal test subject where you prepare the input, you trigger the job, you check output. And then just go back to the console. What I do is I'm going to show the unit test first because I didn't show that just now. So basically, you can see I have 4 tests which are running in here. Just ignore the warning because Airflow tend to have a lot of warning where they are kind of busy fixing that. So basically, I'm having 4 tests in here, and every test passes. So this is the way I run the unit test. And end-to-end test is interesting because so when I trigger it, if you notice that I put a waiting here, this is the really dumb way to check if the pipeline is finished. But in the real life, what I had before was I wrote a polling function, which will be putting let's say 60 seconds in there. But I'm not going to wait for 6 seconds. I'm going to check like 1 second, maybe 2 seconds, and then to 3, and then to 5, like a Fibonacci way to do that. So in here, if I trigger that, you can see, let's see if I have that running. Oh, it's too quick. OK, I'm going to trigger that again. Oh, sorry, it hasn't triggered. So it's in here. So you can see the DAG should be running or OK, you can see this is the one just got triggered. So you can zoom in into that. So you can see it's running in here. So one of the things that Airflow is really good is that this UI is sort of interactable. So in here, like if I want to see what's the downstream for these two, it's already there, really visible. That's a 2.0 feature. And yeah, and also in here you can see everything finished. But if in some instance, let's say, so inside of here, I can just, in my raw data, I can just say I delete this account. Let's say this account. I'm going to delete that just to show you how it fails. So how to rerun this job? You can just click that, and then you clear the status of this one. And then you can see all the downstream one will be, the status will be cleared. So in here, you can, if you scroll down, this auto-fresh is 2.0 feature as well. You can see this thing failed. And then one of the good things that Airflow can do is that you can actually go to the log from the UI, other than you dig into your terminal, your command line, just to see what's going on. So in here, if I zoom in a bit, you can see in here it's quite clear because I just deleted the file, so you can't find the file. So meaning, you can actually maintain or support your DAG from the UI, which is quite good. So just back to the bucket, I'm going to add that thing again. So I have this task. So this file, if I upload that again, and because in the real life, when you have a pipeline, sometimes you have an SLA with your data provider. They say, hey, my file will be arriving at 3 a.m., but sometimes they arrive a bit late. Then you as a data engineer, you tend to support this DAG. Then what you normally do, like what I did before, is I come into the work, and then I go to the UI, and I see, hey, this thing actually failed. And then I go to the bucket and see, hey, the file is actually there. And then what I do, I just go in here, and then clear the status again, and then you will flow again. So if you notice that these 2 tasks already finished, so I don't need to rerun them because they are already finished. All I need to do is to make this task running, and then it will automatically continue the pipeline. It's like you have something went wrong, and then when you log into website, Airflow website, you can actually make the task continue. Cool. So that's pretty much all I have for writing custom operator, writing DAG, writing tests. And then the next thing I want to talk about is the CI/CD. So people have different sort of interactions, different, how to say, people have different ideas about how to do CI/CD, but this is what I think is good. For the CI part, what I normally do is like I could either have a trigger either on code commit or PR credit. So basically, after this event, a series of tasks will be running in my CI system. In this case, I could use GitHub Action, I could use Circle CI, Buildkite, whatever tools you are using. You're pretty much running unit tests, running some linting. Basically, what I normally do is I'm running Black, I'm running PyLint, everything in here. Make sure my code is actually in the same standard as everybody agrees. And then after that, I do source code scan, like the normal one. If you have your internal security code scan tool, you tend to do that. And some company, they store deployment artifacts in tools like JFrog. You can do that as well. Just pack everything, zip it up, and push to the Artifactory. And then that's how the CI finish. And then after that, the next task could be deployed to a test environment where I run the end-to-end test in there. And to some companies where they maintain a staging environment, you can run that same thing as well. And then after that, that's how you deploy to production. And having some monitoring in there would be good. And troubleshooting, I just showed a few things before. There's one thing that is quite good in Airflow is that if you somehow deploying a broken DAG, so inside of Airflow UI, you can actually see that. And you can see the line is actually in here. So you can go through. So in this instance, what I did was I missed the import, one of the operators, I missed that. Then in here, I can see what things I'm missing. So from the UI, you can do that. So this one is the one that I showed before, which is for some reason, some of the file doesn't arrive. So inside the log, I can see that. So the third one is kind of interesting. You can see in here, I don't know if you can see that. If not, it's 403 access denied. So in this instance, what I did was, so inside of GCP, there's a thing called IAM, which is used to control your access for a certain service. So in here, I just remove the access to the bucket. So in here, you could imagine a scenario where you have some kind of Terraform defined, or either I don't know, maybe some kind of, if you're on AWS, you have CloudFormation. For some reason, somebody removed certain permission. In here, you can clearly see what's the missing permission. And then you can go back to the infrastructure code to see if actually somebody actually removed that. So yeah, so what's next? So like what I mentioned before, because this pipeline is kind of easy compared to the real life one. But in the real life one, like what I said, the tracking information could come out with from SFTP, like from Adobe, they tend to do that. And then from here, you can see, you can find the built-in operator, meaning you don't need to actually credit yourself. And also, like what I said, we should sort of bring in email preference data so that you don't overspam people. And then lastly, is a quite important one, which is if you are using Airflow, but your in-house, you already have multiple pipelines already building in Golang, Java, PHP, whatever language you are using, you can still use Airflow to orchestrate in that. But you tend to use, let's say if you have in-house Kubernetes cluster, then you can deploy the task to the pod and then wait it to finish. And then inside of Airflow, you can still see a visual way of your pipeline running. I think that's all I have. I'm going to go to the question section. So hopefully I have some Slido thing. So the first question, do you think there will be a future meetup talk up on Airflow 2.0? That's a good question because so I was preparing this talk and I thought about maybe I should have this kind of GCS composer running. And then if you look at the composer, it's actually 1.10.15, I guess. It's quite different. So I thought about maybe this won't be a talk, but maybe a blog post, just for people once. I'm just thinking once either Composer or AWS launch their 2.0 hosted service, I can write a blog post just to talk about like what's actually the change and how you can migrate that. The second one is, do you use any external system to store latest run and query Airflow logs yourself? So the first question is to store latest run. Like what I said, what I have now is like, I personally believe if I can make it simple, don't make it complex. So in here, what I do is I'm just creating, you can see, I'm creating a few empty files I just put in there. Don't write an API if that's only one endpoint, just do that in this way. Because data pipeline, at least in this use case, is not a really heavy one. So don't just write an API because that will cost you more. And in terms of log, if you are running that within GCP, you have cloud monitoring, Slack driver, all in here, so you can find your log in there. And within the AWS, you can use what's the logging system called? Yeah, CloudWatch. Yes. You see my AWS knowledge is a bit rusty. So in here, so I can just quickly show you if you are using Composer, which I have that in here. So it behind the scene integrate with Google thing. So you see I have some error in here that we're trying. So this is their logging. If I need to zoom that. So you see all the logs are in here. So again, Airflow is a really, it's a slightly complicated thing. So it will get some time to get used to like all the concept in here, like a scheduler, worker, and other stuff. So basically, it would be good to centralize the log. If you are using Elasticsearch, like a ELK stack is good as well. If you are using cloud, just use cloud monitoring or CloudWatch.
Could I add a little thing onto that question?
Yeah.
You record the end of the runtime.
Yes.
But not the start. Do you really trust Airflow not to start heaps of them if it hasn't finished? Or do you really trust it to finish? Or is it just that it's a demo and you didn't record the start time?
Yeah, that's a good thing. I was hoping somebody could catch that. So basically, until this morning, I thought about, hey, I should put a thing in here. Like I should put a bucket file in here. Glad you caught it. So basically, the idea is like if you are running a really long pipeline, the actual thing is that if you finish a slightly heavy, sort of a long task, you need to record it. So in this instance, because I'm loading that in parallel, so it's not that important. But in real life, if let's say I have a task to copy from SFTP to GCS, then you should record that. So in my use case, I should put a file in here. This file was me just using a command line just to upload the file. So yes, good call. So the next one is, do you have some reference guide on setting up Airflow on local machine similar to your setup? Okay, so this one is actually from Airflow. So Airflow, I'll just quickly show that. Set up, Docker Compose. So I actually created my own one like 2 years ago because at that time the documentation is not that good. So in here you can actually see they actually have this thing already. So if you want to create your own thing, just search and you will find, or you just go to the Airflow documentation, you can find the file in here. Basically copy that and then do Docker Compose up, you get an Airflow. And the default username and password is also in here. So you see password. So you see the default username password is all in here. So basically, I didn't create this. I have my own version of that, but I didn't create this one. This one is really good. I could say my skill for Docker Compose is not this up. So the next question, have you done a cloud Airflow deployment? If so, what kind of service do you use? Okay, this is a really good one because if I have a chance to run this like again, in a enterprising environment, I wouldn't maintain my own Airflow. So if you ask people, hey, do you enjoy Airflow? There could be two answers. One is whoever writing the data pipeline. The second one is whoever maintained the data pipeline. Because the one who writes the data pipeline will be pretty happy because it's really good. I can write this, write that. But people who maintain that, they need to manage a distributed system. It's really not a thing that, some people enjoy. So for me, I once run an Airflow cluster within Kubernetes. That was really difficult because, someday, I couldn't do GCS upload because the network policy within Kubernetes got wiped off. So, hooray, you can't go outside. So if you want to sort of run Airflow, I suggest you either do GCS, Google version Composer, or AWS version Managed Airflow, or Astronomer. They have their own version. I really want to try that in someday, just to see what they're doing, because if you look into the committer, I see a lot of really active committers. They are from this company, so they must know their stuff. So back to the deployment part. So I'm using maybe Composer as an example. So the deployment is quite easy. So the service actually included. If I do this deployment pipeline, what I'm going to do, because it's in GCP, I'm going to use Cloud Build, which is a CI/CD tool that GCP included. So basically, if you created an instance in here, within GCP, there's a bucket. So inside a bucket, you can see there are like a DAGs folder and plugins folder. So basically, deployment is as easy as putting the file in here. So in this case, for the DAG one, I just put my file in here. And for the plugin one, I just put my plugins in here. So deployment is that easy. So copy the file, and behind the scene, what the Google does is Google has a container to sync the file from GCS to the container. And AWS does the similar thing, because AWS managed version is pretty much like a sort of similar architecture with Composer, because Composer comes a bit early. If you are interested in how this thing got deployed, you can go to my previous talk, because I talk about how you can deploy that. So what's your opinion on using just Kubernetes pod operator and implement the business logic inside of a container? That's a really good question, because I have my own view about Kubernetes. So I always talk to people, like, if you are really, like, if you are a small company or you are new to your cloud journey, don't just over-invest your time, because the learning curve for Kubernetes is pretty high. So what I tend to do is, like, if I have this kind of native thing, like, for example, I'm getting the data from A, moving data to B, and if that's like a lower computing stuff, I would just not using Kubernetes operator. But if that's a really heavy computing one, like what I mentioned in my last talk, don't do any heavy computing inside of Airflow worker. Let the computing happen in either on the cloud itself, on Kubernetes. Don't let it happen within worker, because that will slow down your Airflow cluster a lot. We got some ticket from DoiT where our customer just send a ticket saying, hey, my Airflow DAGs is not running, and then we go to see there, and then they're doing like a really heavy computing in there. We either ask them to, maybe get a slightly bigger machine, or try to move the computing out. So in this instance, Kubernetes protocol operator can help. This is one example. And the other example is, if you have some kind of workload you've previously written in Java, don't just translate that to Python, because you may have more important thing to do. Just put that in the pod where you can run it inside of a Kubernetes, but you just let Airflow to orchestrate in that. So next one. So any chance the end-to-end test code can be modularized and reused? Yes, it's like so because it's Python, so you can pretty much just having a UTF function. So basically in my previous project, what I did was I have all these common functions put in there, such as uploading to a bucket, creating a table or delete a table or delete the data within the table. That's all the function. So in here, what I did was I put everything in this test class, but this is not the, how to say, if you want to scale, where you have different people writing the tests, you should bring this test out, because this is not really related to the test itself. It's pretty generic. So the answer is yes, you should modularize that and move it out. The next one is, what are your suggestions building meaningful tests for Airflow DAGs, especially the function building on key sensor operators? That's a really good one. So I am, how to say, firstly, I'm not I don't quite understand what is key sensor, but I can share my view on having stuff within the DAG itself. I don't prefer to do that. I see some people creating pipeline where they only use Python operator, and then what their operator is just calling a function, and then they put like all the functions within the DAG. So to me, that's not a really sustainable way. What I prefer is actually creating an operator and having it tested, rather than embedding a lot of logic, putting inside of the DAG. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but that's just my preference. So the next one, do you redeploy just change DAGs all days? What is all days?
All DAGs.
All DAGs, okay. So because Airflow, behind the scene, it has the syncing mechanism. So normally what we do is we deploy everything, because if you are deploying, let's say if you are deploying a web API, you tend to just having everything. You don't just deploy the changed API endpoint, right? So you deploy everything. So behind the scene, Airflow will load your DAG. It will load the change ones. It's clever enough to not get confused. So the answer is yes, we deploy everything. The next one is, could you speak about high-level difference between pipelines in Airflow versus CI/CD behind obvious things like Python versus YAML? So in my opinion, pipeline contains a lot of stuff. You could have data pipeline, you could have CI/CD pipeline, you could have other like machine learning pipeline. So to me, I once saw somebody use Airflow as a CI/CD tool. I was like, yeah, it worked, but is that the right way of using that? Probably no. I will use another more mature tool. So again, I see somebody using Cloud Build to do data pipeline, and then I was like, it worked? Oh, okay, it worked. But then the limitation is Cloud Build by default has like 10 workers. If you have like 100 data set, Cloud Build is not the right way. So to answer the question, Python versus YAML, I personally prefer Python to do data, YAML to do other stuff. Because if you have YAML, like there's another product called Argo. It's quite good, where you can, pretty much use YAML to define your workflow. You can do data, you can do CI/CD. Yeah, like your preference. But if I could choose, I would use Python to define the structure. But I wouldn't use Python to do CI/CD. I would use YAML, like all these kind of, GitHub way or GitLab, you have a YAML to define your CI/CD. Yeah, this is just my preference. The next one is, can you speak about the setting access sensitive environment variables within Airflow, for example, bucket name and KMS key? Cool, that's a really good one, because I didn't cover that. So for accessing sensitive environment variables, so if you are deploying Airflow within Composer, you can leverage the native GCP service called Secret Manager. So Composer is able to read from there. This is actually the recommended way. Don't just put that inside of the environment variable inside of Airflow, because what if somebody hack into your container? Same thing with AWS. AWS has a similar product as well. So you can actually put everything in there and then access from Airflow.
I think it has native integration with KMS, AWS KMS now.
Yeah, it's quite good. So, oh, something got changed. So what would you recommend me to set up Airflow on AWS EC2 or AWS Fargate or managed Airflow? Oh. Again, depends. I would start with Docker Compose on EC2. Again, if you want to verify a theory, do that in a bare minimum cost before your team or yourself is familiar with Airflow. Other than I deploy everything. Like I'll give you an example for this composer. So this one actually require I think 3 or 4 machines running there. It's quite pricey. So if you are sort of want to test your theory, just run that. Like a Docker Compose is a good way. You can run that locally. You run that on EC2 or computer engine instance. Just do that before you get familiar. So you get familiar, then you started to think about like, should I do that? Should I manage myself? Should I have cloud provider to manage that? Because there's another interesting point in here because having hosted service can save your effort. Also, it will bring you trouble because if something breaks, you need to ask your hosted provider what's going on. And then they could be saying, hey, you can't access this database because it's hosted. Then you need to do a lot of tricky way. You somehow SSH to the instance and then do the Python and use SQL Alchemy to access the database. I did that before. Our clients did that. So depends. So to me, start with EC2, hosted that. Once you get familiar, try hosted service. And then if you feel like, hosted service is good enough for you, just let it run that way. If not, try to have your own deployment. But bear in mind that will cost some effort because, like what I said, it's a distributed system, a small distributed system, but it's still a distributed system. So managing that is not that easy compared to a managed one. The next one, I sometimes roll my own functional data pipeline using Docker Compose and single-use container. When should I add the complexity of Airflow? I feel like, so basically, I really like Airflow. I even spend my own time just to send the PR, but I'm not saying Airflow is for everything. So if you are a user where you have some kind of bash script running in a cron tab, it's working perfectly, don't touch it. Just try that in a new way where you want to build a new environment, a new pipeline, and then you use Airflow. So in this instance, you already have these functional data pipelines, and it's working okay. So the question I would ask is that just, are you sort of, if there are any other things you want to add on top of this? If yes, is your current setup good enough? Or is your current setup able to scale well? Because Airflow is really good. I see some really big company running like hundreds of thousands of DAG, and they're running pretty good. And people can log into there and have a really good visibility on all the pipeline that you are running. But versus if you have a cron tab, you have to look into a lot of things. So the answer is really depends. So for me, I would say just keep whatever running. And when there's a new things, try Airflow, like what I mentioned before, Docker Compose within a EC2 machine or computer engine. Make sure you're comfortable slightly migrating your stuff in there. Without breaking stuff, but ideally you may break stuff, but long term you will see the value of Airflow where you have a visualized stuff, you have pipeline as Python code, you have all these kind of integration with other systems, you have one place to manage all your pipeline. That's still an ideal way. So to me, there's no silver bullet, really depends on the scenario. But I really recommend people to look into Airflow, not only Airflow itself, but understanding what the problem you try to solve, like all the concept. Like for For the stuff like Argo, I see a lot of good stuff as well. Like personally, I want to try Argo because Argo is running on Kubernetes. So I want to understand how it works so that, if there's anything that I can learn, that would be good. Cool. So there's another one. One more question on AWS. What config EC2 instance would you suggest? Consider doing ETL of 20 gigabytes data every day. Oh. So again, think about if the computing actually happened within the EC2 itself. Again, I just recommend people don't really having a lot of computing running in there. So like in AWS world, you could, having the data within, let's say within the S3, and then you have glue to do that. So basically, you can have a really bare minimum instance, maybe, 2 CPUs, you can run that, and then all it does is to kick off a glue job, and glue job will be finishing all this kind of heavy computing for you. And that would be, you could have that running pretty quickly and not costing you too much. And again, there's another way to do that. AWS has another tool, it's called a step function. You can use step function to do that. So again, don't try to use Airflow for the sake of using that, just to think about if you can learn anything from there, or you can look into your real use case to understand if that's actually the right way to do that. Again, balance what you want to do for your current situation and plan for not like 10 years later, but near future. Yeah. Cool.